It's Andra Zaharia.
And Dave Smyth.
And this is the Cyber Empathy Podcast. By taking an empathetic approach to technology, we can create space for positive change and healthy relationships to grow.
We share stories of kindness, curiosity, and connection that show how we can all shape online privacy and security.
Thanks for being here.
So I just finished reading This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth, she's a New York Times journalist, or was, or might still be. And I had no idea that there was this whole trade in buying and selling zero-day exploits, and that governments have been stockpiling these for as long as software's been around almost, and just how much access they have to everything. They can basically infect anything with lots of these exploits, some of which are zero click, so you can be sent a message or something and just receiving the message will exploit a device. It's absolutely wild what she talks about in that book, and it seems like it's absolutely everywhere.
It is. It's very generalized. And if I may just unpack that just a little bit for people who don't necessarily master the vocabulary, the language, the lingo, I guess, in cybersecurity, zero-day vulnerabilities are security holes in software that the software makers don't know about. So they don't know that it exists. Someone else found it and they haven't reported it, so they don't know how to fix it. It's just, like having a big house and one of your windows is open and you can't see it because you don't really go into that room. But, a neighbor saw it, but they're not telling you because they're interested in using that window to come in and get stuff out of your fridge every now and then whenever they feel like it.
Your neighbor's cat won't tell you.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's a nice and fun way of putting it. And hopefully that'll make it a bit more digestible and palatable than how bad the actual thing is. And the other thing is that, yes, governments do trade these things constantly. It's part of their attack and defense strategy. It has become one of the market for these types of vulnerabilities is absolutely huge. Their value is absolutely huge. Imagine having a security hole that you can use to get into people's email addresses. You do not want to tell other people about it. You want to keep it to yourself so you can snoop in on whoever, wherever, for as long as you want. What I wanted to highlight about this book, who sounds very doom and gloom because things are really bad, but where I think that the, let's say, alignment with empathy is that this kind of books helps you have more empathy for the people working in cybersecurity, because you realize the complexity and just the burden of having to deal with these things on a daily basis constantly, and the responsibility and pressure that come with it, because they are huge. These are matters of national security, of societal stability, of us having access to water and gas and other things that we take for granted because it's, we've always had them. So tell us more about this book and how the world ends, I guess.
So what I didn't know, there's so much I didn't know. This book was a whole education for me. But I had no idea that things like Stuxnet and the WannaCry, I think WannaCry, which was the bug that shut down the NHS over here with the ransomware. I may be misquoting this, but I think that those came from NSA or CIA gathered 0 days that had been exploited and strung together. I think maybe they were released somehow. They were put out into the wild and then people started stringing them together. They were almost like point and shoot things. One of the book's conclusions is it's wild that governments have been stockpiling these things for their own use without telling companies like Microsoft, who are obviously a huge target for this stuff because it's used everywhere. Not forgetting that if that stuff gets out, it can be used to do all sorts of stuff, like target dams and try and shut dams down, or turn off the lights in the dead of winter.
I remember the WannaCry weekend like it was yesterday. It was a Friday afternoon/evening, 2016. And news started to hit. I mean, I was working for a cybersecurity company and everyone just came online at the same time. It was one of the probably most memorable experiences of my life, and then something that a bit of a growing up experience, a bit of a coming of age in cybersecurity experience. So we got news, in the cybersecurity industry, everyone was on Twitter talking about the fact that, yes, there had been a leak about a range of security vulnerabilities in software, but also tools to exploit them a couple of months before WannaCry happened. So someone found a way to deploy a bit of malicious software that could replicate itself. And that's a worm that you probably hear about. And that is terrible because basically what it did is that this thing crawled exposed systems that had this vulnerability, which no one knew about. They hadn't had time to update the systems and, close that security gap. And it would crawl systems, infect them with ransomware, which effectively encrypts data, it blocks you out of the system, and then it replicates along on every other device connected to the network, including, and we don't mean just servers and laptops, we mean industrial equipment and medical technology and all things like that. So we got wind of that this was happening. And as you can imagine, almost every company in the world, not almost, probably all of them, first of all, they called their employees to tell them to shut down everything, like their phones and laptop that moment, because it was spreading and they couldn't stop it. You couldn't stop it unless your phone was disconnected, your device was disconnected from the internet. And then everyone wanted to buy any security solution, all of the security solutions in that moment, except that this was such a big issue. So the NHS had troubles. Hospitals were shutting down. Car factories were shutting down. All sorts of companies in logistics, Maersk, they had to actually redo, because of a subsequent attack, their entire IT infrastructure in 10 days. That's one of the top 3 shipping companies in the world, on which, now that we know in 2022, the world depends on to bring stuff from point A to point B. Imagine being a company expecting a shipment and the entire system is down. You don't know when it will arrive, if it will arrive, and it took months for companies to recover from this. So it was totally terrible. And there's an adjacent story to this, that the ethical hacker who stopped this attack by buying the domain that was launching these attacks was actually arrested by the FBI. And there's a whole story behind that. A link to another podcast where he did like an in-depth interview to show you the inequalities of the system and the lack of ability of the system to deal with nuanced things and to understand the complexity behind these kind of things. So that attack was truly terrible. It was the first globalized cyber attack that had such a real and undeniable impact in the what we call real world, which is that the internet is still the real world, it's just in a different shape, that had such a big and undeniable effect that it just changed the world forever. We'll never, look at security or do security the same way again. And you bet that cyber criminals and the mob, not exaggerating with this, and state actors will try to replicate this in the future. They're doing like their best to try to find something else that works again on this scale and at this magnitude. So I just wanted to share that story because it totally brought up all of these feelings and just emotion that were packed in that weekend specifically and in the weeks and months that followed after it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think that like a single hack or a single exploit or set of exploits packaged up in a nice little infectious file or however it got around it could have that sort of devastating impact. She says at the end of the book that the sort of rationalizations for like keeping these tools are buckling because governments have defended the stockpiling because they're critical for like war planning or national security or keeping an eye on adversaries and things. But she says the rationalizations are buckling because they ignore the fact that the internet is connecting us in a way that's, we're all inextricably connected. And says digital vulnerabilities that affect one affect us all, which is undeniable. This stuff will still be going on right now. Like she's talking in the book about the pandemic. It's incredibly it's an incredibly recent book, and of course, the pandemic is connecting us even more than we were connected before. So that's just like one little bit of the book's themes, but it's just a really striking thing that the sort of lack of empathy in stockpiling these things for their own purposes, not thinking about like the wider impact of that if those things got out as they did.
Yep. And as they continue to do, because this keeps on happening every now and then. And what I appreciate about these books and why I think that it is so valuable every now and again to read a book that covers these topics, or to get started on your journey towards strengthening your understanding of cybersecurity aspects and their implications, and privacy issues and their implications, is the fact that these books give you a full perspective, a rich perspective. They bring together all of the important events. They show you how they're connected. They show you how they impact each other and how kind of they precede each other and how everything builds on top of each other. It's systems thinking, basically, which is one of the key mental frameworks that cybersecurity uses, and it generally a critical thinking tool that we can all use because we need it in our lives. This is something that I truly appreciate because it is a huge effort to put these things together in a way that's easy to understand. So instead of reading tens of articles or trying to keep up with the news, which is so difficult, if you want to be empathetic towards yourself and still give yourself that space to think about these things and to get informed, reading this book is an absolutely great place to start. I'm not just saying this as a devoted book lover, because I will always love books more than anything else. I'm saying this from the perspective of a reader who has educated herself throughout the years with the help of these authors who do the difficult work of putting this together. Because now some of these things may seem obvious to me because I've been in cybersecurity since 2015, but there are so many other things that I don't know. And just seeing them together helps you understand, again, their connectedness, but also helps improve your clarity and helps you make sense of them and try to use that information in an actual way, which I think is very, very powerful. So you're on a bit of a reading streak in terms of privacy and security, Dave, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I'm not much of a fiction reader. So what have you been reading?
Not as much as I want to in this particular area. I have to balance nonfiction with fiction reading. I need both. I just need both. But one of the books that has stuck with me that I know you read as well, and that has made a big impact on me, was Edward Snowden's Permanent Record. I have a nice little story about how I actually got this book, the physical version of it. It had been on my list for a while, but in 2019, when I attended DevCamp, which is a cybersecurity conference in Romania that kind of gathers the cybersecurity community in Romania, but also kind of throughout Europe, especially in the eastern part, I was presenting the event. And at the end of day one, someone came to me and gave me the book and told me like, hey, this is for you. I think you're doing a good job. So thanks for that, which was totally unexpected. I was taken aback. I was very, humbled and delighted. I love getting books. And on the first page, he wrote a dedication that freedom comes from the heart, which was very touching. And it was very an emotional thing. And I picked it up. I picked it up only last year, honestly. I mean, it stayed with me. I always had my mind on it. But I believe that sometimes we read books when we need to read them and when we can make the most of them. And once I read it, I mean, not only, we know so much about the Snowden revelations and basically how he just changed the paradigm and he changed what we knew. He confirmed what some of us suspected about the system and how it works. But I saw so much of myself in his childhood, or parts of it, because I wasn't a tech whiz like he was. But in parts of it, his fascination with technology, with the internet, the possibilities that it opened up, how that degraded and how that got tangled up and messed up, and it became a tool to gather power and influence and exert that power and influence. To me, there are plenty of incredibly powerful examples in there including, like, technologies for spying and the use of ancient technology that only one person knows how to operate at this point, and keeping secrets and spying on virtually everyone. I truly recommend that you read a book and take from it what you need and make of it what you will. But I was particularly taken aback by two quotes. One was the fact, so he says that technology doesn't have a Hippocratic oath. And so many decisions that have been made by technologists in academia, industry, the military, and government since at least the Industrial Revolution have been made on the basis of can we, not should we. And the intention driving a technology's invention rarely, if ever, limits its application and use. So just like we were talking about at the beginning when you were mentioning the, zero-day vulnerabilities, it is true. I mean, technology is such a powerful thing, but there are, he also mentions this, that basically these people who create technology and who yield most of the power by using it, they have no incentive to act against themselves. And that's where how system gets corrupted. There's no way to enforce at this point in time, or before GDPR, there wasn't. I promise I'm going to end soon with my very long-winded thought. We don't have a set of strong enough laws and rules to create this Hippocratic oath and to make sure that the ethical implications are considered before we do things, not after Facebook takes over the world, but perhaps just a bit further back in that journey and process. These are very big topics to think about, but I do believe that we can all make a contribution no matter how passionate we are about technology and security and privacy, or if we simply, as a user who values their privacy and just wants to, for technology to serve them and not the highest paying bidder.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. The thing about the Hippocratic Oath reminds me of Heather Burns, she works in privacy and like ethics field. She wrote something last year, I think, about how people developing software, they're not trained as like in like ethics or like any of these things. And often those are the people making the decisions about these things, either because they're deferred to because they deal with it all the time, so they should know, or no one's thinking about the ethical side or like how things should work or like the implications of it. Yeah, it's a really interesting and pervasive issue, I think. And also with like technology, when you're writing like code or like creating something, there's a lot of room to do stuff in there. Like even if it's open source, unless it's actually checked, it's very easy to do stuff that's on the edges of what you might consider to be like acceptable in terms of like privacy or ethical concerns. Whatever you do in terms of trying to enforce things, it all comes down to the individual or like the teams that are writing this stuff. And it's very hard to know what's actually going on. And This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, there's a story about how somebody says there's a test that somebody does about how many lines of code could you say for certain there are no security exploits in. And somebody in one of the 3-letter agencies says, I could say with 100% accuracy that there wouldn't be something in like 10,000 lines of code. And then if they find out that that's not true, like they can demonstrate that they can hide stuff in 10,000 lines of code or something. That's not very many lines of code. And yeah, a Hippocratic Oath seems like a very good idea because like you trust a doctor who's advising you based on their experience and you just have to trust what they're saying. We kind of need to do the same thing with code, and people need to understand the possible impact of what they're writing and creating. And at the moment, the people who are doing that aren't armed with like the training, the knowledge to advise on it, unless they do all of that work themselves, which often they're not being trained or set up to do. Like if people have like CPD in their jobs, how many times is that going on like privacy things or data protection things or ethical things or on things that educating that in that arena? I'd bet in a lot of cases it's only when it's mandated that they have to, because the company need to cover their backsides.
Exactly. And I think that this is so important because we still think, and generally speaking, on average, people still think that technology is separate from our real lives. There's the online life, which is not that real. It's virtual, it's very abstract, and real life. But that is such a bogus distinction that doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for more than a decade. And yes, developers do have a responsibility. Their work might be impacting people in the sense that a medical application might misfunction if we were to, tie directly to, let's say, someone's health. But also, like you mentioned, someone could use a security vulnerability to release water from a dam and flood an entire area. They can take down electricity networks and so many other things with direct and immediate impact over people's lives. And it's just like, imagine, and I know this sounds like sci-fi, but it is not. And I've seen and attended conferences where this was presented, like, imagine crashing a satellite. And I, for people who saw Gravity, the movie, that scenario, that the movie script is based on a potential real life scenario where a satellite that loses its trajectory will crash into others and potentially then crash into Earth and not just damage communications, because that would be like the least of our problems-ish, but it would crash on Earth and potentially kill people and damage buildings and so many other things. So these are things that technology makes possible. And yes, I truly believe that, there are people who are doing a lot to educate others, and they're investing a lot of personal time and resources to educate themselves, to pass on this knowledge, just like you're doing with your business, with, your articles and so on, like we're trying to do now. But that's because we want to. That's because we're making this effort because we care about it. And it's not that most developers don't care about it. It's that they don't have the time. When you have to keep up with technology and do your job and, have a life, it's so difficult to be able to juggle all of these things and to make sure that you're doing the right thing, especially if you're working on a specific project that you don't know how it's going to be assembled along with other people's work and where that's going to be shipped off. That could be used in war for killer drones or other things like that. This is the kind of conversation that these kind of books start. And I think that's what makes them so valuable to read. And that's how it helps create these bridges between people and create sort of more respect and understanding for the type of work that people do or could be doing or should be doing and how we might help each other get there. Because it's not one person's effort. A small group's effort is not enough to create lasting change in individuals and then in teams and companies and hopefully, escalating in a good way from there.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to what you were saying about people thinking that the online world is different from like the real world, not to keep on going back to this is how they tell me the world ends, but she says in that book that the barrier between the physical and digital worlds is wearing thin, which I thought was a really nice way of putting it, that these things the lines are becoming more and more blurred, like especially when you see like the potential for the impact in the physical world of things that are happening in the digital world. In the summary at the end of the book, she talks about how, if we think about 9/11, she says it's now arguably easier for a rogue actor or nation state to sabotage the software embedded in the Boeing 737 MAX than it is for terrorists to hijack the planes and send them careering into buildings. And I thought that was a really great summary of how things have changed. And that's in a very short period of time. That's only 2 decades. These worlds are becoming intertwined in ways that we're kind of aware of, but at the same time, we're sort of oblivious to at the same time.
I think it's kind of a boiling frog situation where we're sitting in gradually hot water until something along the lines of don't look up happens. And then it's just watching a train wreck happen and not being able to do anything about it. But there are things that we can do right now to try to avoid a potentially, world-ending scenario, hopefully, because there are tons of people doing great work. There are all of these authors doing so much research. There are so many organizations and initiatives and NGO and people putting themselves at risk and doing so many things to keep us safe. Things that we don't even imagine, things that we don't even know about, not even us who are actively, involved in the space. And I guess I just want to, if any of them are listening, I just wanted to say thank you. I have huge respect for them. And I think that it is a big task, a big challenge to take on a mission like this, simply because it's so complex and it has so many ramifications, and they have to be so well equipped mentally, emotionally, intellectually to be able to make good decisions in such a complex environment. And that's why I believe that reading these type of books and talking about them is essential, because they help keep our mind clear when the lines between reality and virtual construct are blurred the way that they're getting blurred. Hey, Meta, how do we make sure that, how do we know if what we're seeing, feeling, hearing is real or not? There's deep fakes, there's the entire Orwell's 1984 scenario that is so relevant today, just with much better tech. So how do we make sure that we stay clear-minded and that we're able to still, straight? It's just by constantly educating ourselves and having, getting all of the help and support we need, including by reading books like these.
Yes. Agreed.
I want to kind of to say on the back of this, since we got into the whole topic of thinking clearly and how our thinking gets distorted, one of the books that has stayed with me in the past years, and I read this a while back, is called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr. And this was before The Social Network, the documentary came out, before so many pieces of research came out, and many other documentaries and things explained how social media and the internet generally are screwing our brains. And he makes some very interesting observations in that book, that what we're experiencing is, in a metaphorical sense, a reversal of the early trajectory of civilization. So he says that we are evolving from being cultivators of personal knowledge to being hunters and gatherers in the electronic data forest. And that means that we're using less our mental abilities to think for ourselves, to, draw personal conclusions, to make inferences, to just simply jog our critical thinking. And we're more, this hunter-gatherer behavior, we're just amassing constantly information. And that actually changes your brain's biology. It changes the neural paths in the brain that, govern your most recurring habits. And that's bad. It's not great.
So is arguing that we're not able to store as much information, or is it more that our brains are changing, that we're not able to drill down into to tease at what's actually happening, that we've got a more shallow understanding of information? Is that
exactly? Yeah, you framed it perfectly. He says that, we're slowly losing our ability to think deeply and to just, foster our own ideas and to basically think for ourselves instead of being told what to think and having all of these influences accumulate into our brain and sway us one way or the other. Because when you're constantly, and I know this is by now a cliche, but when you're constantly drinking from the fire hose of information, it is difficult to find space and to create space for deep thinking and just to sit with things. If you're constantly, pulling up your phone to doom scroll, if you're constantly, glued to Netflix to watch a constant stream of something, there is no space in your life for you to just sit and let your brain process and be and come up with those great ideas that we do in the shower, because that's when our brain is disconnected from all sources of information. And we need more of that. So I'm just trying to make a case for being kinder towards ourselves and giving ourselves that space without feeling guilty that we're falling behind and missing out on a bunch of things because we'll never be able to keep up. That is an illusion that's not worth chasing, in my opinion.
Cal Newport makes some similar arguments in digital minimalism. He talks about Henry Thoreau and Walden and the cabin he built in the woods and how he spent time there, how he did all his thinking on walks. And there was a president who spent hours walking for similar reasons. It's funny because it's partly a sort of like human insatiable appetite for this stuff, but it's also partly that we're being conditioned to
push the button.
Yeah, and tech companies are exploiting our need to see what the notification says to get that little hit. I was watching a talk of Cindy Gallop, who was saying that every time, she couldn't remember who came up with this quote, but they said that every time you get a little notification or a like or like a retweet or something, internally you're feeling like you're receiving like a little pellet of love. And she was talking about that in a positive way, like how can we send those? How can we make people feel like that? But actually also there's a dark side to that, which is that we're being manipulated by feeling like our appetite for that is being deliberately increased by tech companies exploiting our basic psychology and lizard brains.
Yep. We're basically making our brain obese. And
yeah, exactly.
It's too much for its own good. And I always try to highlight this in conversations with people from everything that I've learned about myself and about other people through either therapy, coaching, reading about neuroscience and how everything works together, because all that we've talked about now is deeply tied to each other, although they seem different topics. Everything that I've learned points to the fact that our biology has limits, and technology, the use of how big tech is currently using their power, is severely challenging these limits. We are not built for this. We are built for walks in the forest or walks anywhere. We are built for one-to-one conversations. We're not built to have our eyes glued to the screen and lead static lives and have these constant dopamine hits. Like you said, condition our brains into wanting more and more and more without stopping to ask ourselves why and if this matters in the end. Because at the end of our lives, I don't think that either of us is going to regret not spending more time on the internet or not, listening to all of the podcasts that we could have listened to or anything else. So please, by all means, you can pause this podcast and go out for a walk. If you choose to take us with you, that's even better. But if this, prompts or triggers or inspires you to do something for yourself in terms of self-empathy, by all means, create that space intentionally for yourself, because absolutely no one is going to do it for you. No matter how much they care about you, they cannot. This takes personal willpower.
For sure. And actually all the evidence shows that the companies and like apps that we use and things, they're going to try and exploit it as much as they can. So I think what's difficult about it is that it's actually really a lot of work to turn these things off, to like make that time. It feels to me like it's beyond self-care. It's like you actually have to like work on it to disconnect. Like last year I took email off my phone. And then towards the end of the year, I had to install the app for something. I think I needed like a code to pick something up, and then there was something else where I needed it. And then a couple of months went by, and the app was still on my phone, even though I deleted it a couple of times in the meantime. And I finally deleted it again a week or two ago, and it makes a huge difference. But even as somebody who had wanted, I think I'd gone maybe 6, 7, 8 months without it on my phone. And then suddenly it was on my phone, and then suddenly it was really hard to delete it again. And I've already noticed the impact of that. Like I might sit down, open my phone, like without really thinking about it, and then go to look at my email. And I kind of want to look at it, but I know that I don't want to. And it not being there is enough of a barrier for me to not look at it in that moment. But if it was there, I would totally open it, even if I thought I don't want to. All to say that it's really hard work to keep on top of this stuff and to disconnect in the way that we all know or feel like we should, but actually doing it is hard, and it's an ongoing effort.
It is. And the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to make bad habits difficult to engage in and make good habits easy to sustain. And that's just the simple psychology. Well, not simple. It's the psychology of habit building and kind of rewiring your brain, which is perhaps a topic for a different episode. But I just wanted to highlight this because I am lucky to have one of my best friends as someone who has done tons of research and read everything about this. And she works actually with other people to help them get their digital consumption and their digital lives under control so technology doesn't end up controlling them. And I've learned a ton of things from her. And yes, one of the things is that I haven't had notifications on my phone like at all since I think that I'm almost reaching for 3+ years. And I
Amazing.
only realize how bad they are when I meet up with other people and I see their phones constantly buzzing or popping up, with notifications. And then I realize like, whoa, this is a lot. This is very distracting to me. And if I had these on my phone, I know that it would be difficult. I do sometimes check my email as well. I do sometimes still log into Twitter, for example, or LinkedIn more rarely from the browser. I don't have the apps on my phone, but I have set limits for those. And, perhaps we could touch on tiny habits that have helped us create the space for reading books and letting our brains have a breather and just perhaps engaging in the lost art of doing nothing.
I think you can probably tell me more about that.
I like that our experiences complement each other. So I don't think we'll ever run out of things to share and hopefully, try to help other people with. And getting back to the book topic, if you have if there are books you find interesting that you think we should talk about that are related to, cybersecurity, privacy, ethical debates in this space, please let us know. Share them with us. We'd love to have a read and pick, things that inspire us to have conversations that will hopefully help you.
Yeah, there's so many that we could talk about, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about some books on these topics.
Hopefully not.
Thanks for joining us. For show notes and links from this episode, head to cyberempathy.org, where you can also find resources to guide you to a healthier, more comfortable relationship with technology.
And if you have a question for us, or if there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you too.